This is an age of disruption, of profound revolutionary change.
What we're really asking ministers is to empower the ambassadors.
The only thing that you really push forth is the truth.
You don't see many women represented when it comes to the decisions as to how to handle the pandemic.
Good morning. This is Carlo Martuscelli, and I'm a healthcare reporter for Politico Live. I'm here today to discuss the needs of immunocompromised patients post-COVID-19. The sun is out, the days are long, and if you squint a little, you can just about pretend that COVID-19 is a bad memory. But for those with compromised immune systems, for the vulnerable people living with pre-existing conditions, or for cancer patients undergoing chemotherapy, this fear has never really gone away. And the same is true for their loved ones and carers. For them, the pandemic is still very real, and so is the psychological burden of feeling unsafe, even as people crowd the streets and masks have all but disappeared. And with the rates of COVID-19 slowly, or not so slowly, creeping up again, this time before the arrival of the cold weather, there's even more reason to be careful. It's also a reminder for all of us to not get caught off guard this autumn. But it's not all doom and gloom. Even beyond the COVID-19 vaccines, science has advanced in leaps and bounds since the start of the pandemic. We have a much better understanding of how the coronavirus spreads and how it infects our airways and the rest of our bodies. That means we know which non-pharmaceutical interventions are most important for prevention. Treatments like monoclonal antibodies and antiviral drugs have also greatly improved. They offer real hope for vulnerable patients who need to avoid getting sick. But like the coronavirus vaccines, there are issues of access, and even in Europe, these medicines aren't available for everyone. Today, we'll also discuss any takeaways for the future. One silver lining is the spotlight that's been put on immunocompromised patients and their specific needs and challenges. I hope we can think of ways our public health services can adapt to better meet their needs regardless of the pandemic situation. We will be discussing this and more with our panelists. But first things first, we have some housekeeping remarks. I would like to thank our sponsor, AstraZeneca, for making this event possible, and our audience joining us online. We'd like to make this event as interactive as possible. You can participate by tweeting about it at @LivePolitico and asking questions through Slido at sly.do using the hashtag #ImmunityPostCovid. You know who we are, so I will be prioritizing questions which are sent with a name and organization, so it's as transparent as possible for viewers and panelists. You can already share your thoughts and answer the following poll presented by AstraZeneca. As we move to a post-COVID world, how safely or unsafely do you think that people who are immunocompromised will be able to return to normal in the same way as the rest of the population? We'll be looking at the results of the poll at the end of our panel. But before we get started, we'll be hearing some opening remarks from our sponsor, Hugo Gomes da Silva, Global Medical Head for the Vaccine and Immunology Unit at AstraZeneca.
I want to thank the team at Politico and Carlo for allowing me to offer some opening remarks for this important session today. My name is Hugo Gomes da Silva, and I'm the Global Medical Head at the Vaccines and Infectious Diseases Unit at AstraZeneca. I want to thank also to everyone around this virtual table today for taking time of your, I know it's extremely busy schedules, to come and discuss this important policy action that it's so much needed to support immunocompromised patients. We're talking basically of those that are on dialysis, people that are on chemotherapy or other immunosuppressive medications, people that are living with organ transplant or blood cancers or primary immunodeficiencies. While we know that COVID-19 vaccines have allowed many countries to return to a certain level of normality, they do not offer adequate protection for these immunocompromised people. So leaving this community exposed to ongoing health risks from the virus and at the risk of being left behind of COVID-19 pandemic, it's not something that we can accept. While immunocompromised people currently only make up around 2% of the world's population, they count roughly for around 40% of people that are being hospitalized with breakthrough infection, even after being vaccinated. Furthermore, if you think about these people, they are twice as likely to die and 3 times more likely to be hospitalized due to COVID-19. Furthermore, we know that these people, immunocompromised patients, also tend to harbor new variants of the virus. Because the immune system isn't simply strong enough to kill the virus, it will harbor new variants, and it can take months to clear it. So ultimately, this allows the virus to escape, and potentially this can pose a public health threat. The pandemic has been an incredibly difficult time for people who are living with an immunosuppression or in an immunocompromised state, and this community has faced strict and ongoing isolation. Think about not being able to see your family, your friends, or being part of the society and contribute to society. Furthermore, problems on accessing care, deep anxiety because they have an underlying condition, they cannot go to the hospital, and uncertainty around changing rules and recommendations. Can you imagine what it would be like to live exactly like that? And all of this has taken such a significant toll on these people's life, particularly mental health and quality of life. So in today's session, we want to go beyond raising the awareness of the current gaps and concerns. We want to talk about very concrete policy action that needs to be taken at the EU level, but also at the national level to support these people. As a global community, my gosh, we have made so much, such a tremendous effort and progress over the past 2 years. We've made tremendous efforts to roll out vaccines at the world level at a record pace in prioritizing scientific progress to pretty much support public health strategies. Now it's not the time to lower our arms and quit. The war is not over yet, and we need to keep the momentum. COVID-19 still presents a significant risk to so many people around the world, but we are now armored with new tools, knowledge, experience that we didn't have back at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020. Our understanding of the virus, the disease, it becomes more and more acute every day, and so we need to capitalize on that. Protecting the most vulnerable members of our community doesn't mean instigating strict or sweeping lockdowns with a subset of the population that are ostracized from living their normal day-to-day life. It means simply prioritizing strategy, targeted and effective health interventions based on scientific research, and there is a tremendous wealth of data now that allows us to do that, real-world data, and many of that data is going to be discussed here today. I personally have lost members of my family to COVID-19 over the last 2 years. So this is not only a public fight, this is a personal fight. And I'm certain that all of you there that are part of this roundtable have been touched in some way, shape, or form with this terrible COVID-19 disease. So I want to thank you all to be involved in this important roundtable. You have worked tremendously and tirelessly over the course of the last 2 years and throughout the pandemic and continue to do so. So keep on the fight. I'm looking forward to hearing the discussion and what actions can we do it together to really take the fight against COVID-19 forward and protect the immunocompromised people. Thank you again for your time, and back to you, Carlo.
Thank you, Hugo. We'll certainly be returning to a number of those points that were mentioned right now. Certainly the one about the isolation and the toll on the mental health that vulnerable people are dealing with now, and as well just how much of a greater share of the hospitalization that immunocompromised people make up right now with regards to COVID. But first, we will start with a one-on-one discussion with Jakub Dvoracek, Deputy Minister of Health of the Czech Republic, and then we'll dive into the panel discussion. So, Jakub, Thanks so much for joining us today. We're just a few days away from the Czech Republic taking over the rotating EU presidency from France. A very first question, in a few words, how have you been preparing for this moment, and what are the biggest issues that you want to look at?
Carlo, thank you very much for the first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It's great pleasure to be here with all of you. In the reality, we already started to prepare quite a lot of months ago, and we have a trial of presidency. So we try to really build, on the agenda which were prepared by our French colleagues, and jointly with our Swedish colleagues, to move as far as possible with number of legislative proposals which are coming out from the Commission. So it was a quite interesting time to see, how our French colleagues dealing with the area of healthcare, and it's a very special time. You are absolutely right. We are at the phase when you look out from the window, you have a feeling that all those issues connected with COVID-19 are quite far from us. But in the reality, we have a situation which comes recently. A few weeks ago, you can see the number of COVID-19 positive patients increasing all around Europe. Luckily, we really tried to learn a lot, from what was done in last 2 years, and I believe that the Czech presidency will build on those lessons learned, which comes, from last 2 years. Doesn't matter if it is a joint discussion of European Commission with producers of vaccines, joint effort to limit the spread of the disease, but also we try to learn a lot, how to take care about the people who are vulnerable and who are in the risk of infection. And we know that for coming months, we will have to do a lot to prepare for the autumn. Maybe it's not so far, not months, but maybe weeks, where we will have to again to think, how to protect the people who could be really damaged by this epidemic. And this is probably one of the most important tasks for us, for the Czech presidency. We will have to build on what was done before in the area of purchasing of right treatment, the supply of vaccination. We will definitely try to address the topic of overall drug availability for the patients in Europe, not just the orphan designated products, but also the people who are suffering with cancer and a number of other diseases.
Great. I certainly want to hit again on that point about joint procurement and what the future of that looks like. But before I ask you about that, Hugo just now mentioned the importance of data. Obviously, if we're to understand how to best protect the immunocompromised, for example, and not just them, we need data to know what public health interventions work best, and to zoom out and see how different countries are performing at the EU level. We have a big piece of legislation on that coming down the pipeline, the European Health Data Space, which the Commission presented the proposal earlier this year. How far along do you think you'll be able to get with the EHDS during your presidency?
It's absolutely perfect question, because this is the first time where the European countries could get the data which could serve to really the direct treatment of patient for the primary use, but especially for the secondary use of healthcare data. This is the chance to have the tool to manage the crisis, to manage any other epidemic which could come, but also to deal with the patients which suffer, with the rare disease or with number of other issues. And we believe, it will be a very complicated discussion, because you rightly said, that there is a quite variety of approach of member states towards the healthcare data, the level of availability, of also the level how the healthcare data are, let's say, collected in hospitals, in healthcare providers level. And I believe, we will be probably able to move it forward with number of articles, but definitely we will not finish the whole discussion. I hope that our Swedish colleagues will get the chance to finalize the discussion. But on the other hand, we can see that in number of member states, they're progressing quite fast, like a number of Scandinavian countries. And we will really take it as a chance to do something very important for the healthcare area in the Europe. So this is our legislative priority number one. And I believe that the discussions will be tough, but we will be able to move it as far as possible and to prepare the progress report, which will be then presented during the EBSCO meeting. Okay,
great. So realistic optimism seems to be the operating phrase here. You'll be in the driving seat over the crucial autumn months. In the past 2 years, this is when we've seen, obviously, these coronavirus infections surge and hospitals fill up. How are you thinking about this, both for the Czech Republic and also for the bloc as the presidency? And to attach another question to that, is joint procurement going to play a role here? Should we be thinking about filling up the cupboard, so to speak, with medicines?
I believe that we could move it forward with a joint negotiation. And it also shows, that at the moment we try to buy together, and there was a number of initiatives in the past, like Benelux or the joint Nordic countries approach, for the procurement. It usually fails, on the complexity of reimbursement systems, in national states. On the other hand, what COVID shows and the last 2 years is that we can jointly negotiate and we can come, for the conditions which are then easy to finalize, by member states. And this is something what should not be forgotten, and we will definitely try to build on this lesson. And this is definitely something what can serve us also in coming months, especially in the situation where we talking about the therapy or the treatment, which has a limited production and also, for example, a complicated way of distribution. So this is something what I believe HERA will continue to do it. We will definitely support them. We will also try to help with the negotiation on the area of COVID-19 vaccination. You can see that we really have to renegotiate the agreements to work well for the new conditions. We will definitely have to involve the EMA in a number of discussions to ensure that the approval of future COVID vaccines come faster than before, and it will help us, to prepare, for COVID-19 in the same way as we could do it, for example, for flu or for a number of other diseases, infectious diseases which could spread around. So yes, it's a big goal for us. We also try to think, how to help with overall availability of treatment, for the European patient. You can see that in a number of European states, some of the treatments comes very soon after the registration, but then you have states which have to wait for years. In some small member states, you have therapies which never come for the patient from the side of marketing authorization holder. So this is the discussion which, of course, needs to be managed and led by the DG Santé, but we will definitely try to help.
Great. Thanks so much for that, Jakub. On the vaccine points, it sounds like pharma companies, watch out. Prague is going to be a tough negotiator. We're going to now move into the panel stage of the discussion where Jakub will stay with us. In the panel, we have MEP Stelios Kimporopoulos of the EPP from Greece, and he is group coordinator in the Special Committee on COVID-19. We have Lior Nesher, head of Infectious Diseases Institute at the Faculty of Health Sciences for Ben-Gurion University of the Negev Beersheba, Soroka University Medical Center Israel, and we have Gemma Peters, CEO of Blood Cancer UK. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today for this discussion. To kick things off, I wanted to give the floor to Stelios. Your perspective is particularly valuable because you're both a person living with a pre-existing condition and a doctor as well. So maybe we can start things off on a personal note. Can you just tell us how you've lived in the past 2 years? And, are there any obvious things that strike you that we need to do better in the EU?
First of all, I would like to thank you and good morning, everyone, for this important discussion about what the autumn brings for COVID-19. And it's really, we need to question ourselves if we live in the after COVID-19 pandemic. Yes, indeed, we live in a different era because the threat of a constantly evolving virus has reshaped our understanding of the pandemic timeline and highlighted that for multiple vulnerable groups, there is no end on the pandemic inside. Everyone lived in a difficult time of period the last 2 years. And as it has already mentioned, we lost the contact with our beloved ones, with our work, with our daily life. But yes, we did it and we are here. We lost, especially for many vulnerable groups like me, who are in need of some support. There are difficulties of having this support because there was the fear, there was the isolation, and I think that we are in a time period that we need to create the strategy which will include multiple preventive tools and will create a way that in order not to stay again in isolation if something if in the future some coming we face the same situation. So I think that we need to have in a European level a joint strategy in order to avoid images like in the beginning of this crisis, of this health crisis, that we saw to close the borders, to close our countries, and to believe that we can face this crisis alone. Very soon we understood that we are family. We can fight together this crisis, and therefore I think that as you, Marco, said in the beginning, here in Parliament we created this special committee on the COVID-19 pandemic and the lessons that we have learned, in order to see and what we gain during these years, and we evaluating the impact of COVID-19 to different groups of people, and particularly to the most vulnerable ones. So we are very close and ready as the European Parliament to support the efforts of European Commission to provide lasting protection to these vulnerable groups.
That's great. Thank you. Yes, I've been following the work of the COVID committee, and it's only been a couple hearings, but it's already very interesting. So I think we're all going to be watching with interest to see what the results of the committee are when the report is published. I do want to return to that point on the committee, but before we do that, I did want to introduce a bit a scientific perspective on what we've discovered about the status of immunocompromised people with regards to COVID and what the latest science is telling us about the available treatments as well. So I wanted to go over to you, Lior. Israel has been a leader during the pandemic when it comes to experimenting with new treatments and rolling out the vaccines as well. I wanted to know if you could tell us, what measures are in place in Israel at the moment, and how are you dealing with the needs of immunocompromised patients?
Thank you very much for the invitation, first of all. And I guess I'd be happy to address that issue. I think that Israel indeed has been one of the leaders in this field, and we've been rolling out the vaccines very early and continuing on with the boosting. And I think that it's most important to remember that the non-pharmaceutical interventions, such as masking, isolation, and so forth, are just mitigating factors. They'll only just buy you some time in order to develop other approaches and other medical interventions, which we do now have at hands. I think that the vaccines are extremely effective, and we see that the mortality rates and the serious hospitalization rates are extremely low, even though we do see a surge of Omicron variant now occurring in Israel. And at the same time, we've been rolling out the monoclonal antibody, which is basically a passive immunization or pre-exposure prophylaxis treatment, in which we basically give these severely immune-compromised patients an artificial immune system for a few months that will effectively protect them against COVID. So you have this whole group of patients who have severe immune problems because of their underlying diseases or medications that they're receiving for treating those underlying diseases, and they don't have the ability to develop an immune response to the vaccines, and they remain at risk. And we've seen in the earlier waves that these are the patients that are more severely ill, become to the hospital, and they become very sick, and a lot of them die. And I think that one of the major advances that we now have is with the use of these monoclonal antibodies, because they provide them protection as if their immune system is actually active. And we've been rolling that out in Israel in the past few months, and it is very effective. And all patients who are at high risk receive this pre-exposure treatment, and it gives them protection for a while.
Lior, I actually wanted to ask you a question about that. I mean, we talk about immunocompromised patients as if they're a monolithic block, but how homogeneous are they as a group? And, given that monoclonal antibodies in particular, we have a kind of limited supply, are there specific segments we should be prioritizing when it comes to monoclonals?
Absolutely. That not all immune compromised patients are the same. There are those who are mildly immune compromised and those who are severely immune compromised patients. The patients highest at risk are patients who have defects in their immune system part, which develops the immune response. So patients with lymphoma, patients with leukemia, patients who receive specific biological treatments for B cells, for example, which are a serious part that develops the immune response. Transplant patients, those are the patients that are at the highest risk and should be prioritized to receive these treatments. And patients who are less immune compromised should be prioritized lower on the list, because obviously there's a limited amount of the medication to go around. And that's what we've been doing in Israel. We've prioritized and addressed a specific set of patients who should receive these monoclonal antibodies, and there's the ones to receive it first.
Great, thank you. I think having that science in mind is important, and it makes us understand, immunocompromised patients, it's not just one homogeneous block. But Gemma, I wanted to go over to you next. Stelios, I think, illustrated very nicely some of the challenges of living in the past 2 years as someone with a pre-existing condition. Gemma, can you share with us what your patients are telling you about how they're living at the moment? I know the words fear and isolation have come up in the discussion already so far.
I think, hello everyone, it's great to be here. Thank you for this discussion. It's so important. You've heard already that blood cancer patients make up a significant part of this group of people that are immunocompromised. And as you say, their experience through the pandemic and still today has been really pretty horrendous. They're more likely to be hospitalized if they get COVID. They're less likely to be protected by the vaccines. And as society has moved on and there's a narrative about let's put COVID behind us, I think that's where we started the discussion. These people can't, and we can't as a society. We've got to do the right thing and take everyone with us. So you're right to talk about some of the words that people use. I would add to that forgotten, abandoned is a word that I hear a lot. Collateral damage is another one. So people feel really, really strongly that we collectively don't mind if they're in harm's way so long as the rest of us are all right. And that feels profoundly sad and wrong to me. So I'm really pleased that we're having this conversation because as we've already touched on, it is perfectly possible for us all to move ahead together. There are things that we can do as societies to take everyone with us and so that we can all get back to normal. But you know, to illustrate some of the things we've been talking about, we've got people who are still living in separate accommodation from their families. People who are unable to go back to work, are literally choosing between their livelihood and their life in terms of how they make decisions about what to do now. It's really devastating, and I think we need to shine more of a light on what's the plan out of this for everyone is what we should keep in mind as we have the discussion.
And Gemma, do we have any idea of the impact that COVID-19 is having on blood cancer patients at the moment?
Yes, I mean, we do. Obviously, we hear all the time from blood cancer patients. We did a survey recently, reported back a couple of weeks ago, that says that 83% of blood cancer patients in the UK are still taking protective action to avoid COVID, and a third of patients are still not leaving their house unless it is essential, i.e. for a hospital appointment. So people are really, really concerned because they understand the risk, and it's become worse since other measures like social distancing and mask wearing have been abandoned, and that's made people feel even less safe than they did before.
And on the point of mask wearing, I mean, I think if you go around Europe and in the UK, masks seem to kind of be a thing of the past. How are they living in this moment where these non-pharmaceutical interventions have pretty much all but, gone away?
I think it's very difficult. I mean, there are things people can do themselves in terms of wearing the very protective mask. But in the UK, I know it's not the same across the rest of Europe, but in March, mask wearing was abandoned. And also it's not required in clinical settings either. And that's the thing that's worrying me the most. So we are hearing from patients day in, day out who do not want to go to get treatment.
So people, just to be clear here on that point, when you say masks aren't required in the clinical setting, does that mean doctors aren't wearing masks when they're seeing their patients? Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, so they don't have to. Most hematologists that we're in contact with in hematology clinics, they're deciding themselves that they still want to wear masks. But of course, blood cancer patients don't only go to the hematology unit when they're in a hospital. They would be going to the pharmacy, they'd be going to have their bloods taken. They might have something wrong with their teeth and need to go to the dentist. So elsewhere in hospitals, there isn't mask wearing, although in most, but not all hospitals, it's been in the hematology setting and oncology settings generally, people are continuing to wear masks.
That's great. Very disturbing to hear about, actually. Jakob, given what Gemma just said, as Deputy Health Minister, how are you thinking about these issues in the Czech Republic for these vulnerable patients? And how do we balance, people not wanting to have non-pharmaceutical interventions in place anymore with the very real need of patients with compromised immune systems?
Thank you for the question. I think this is one of the most complicated issues. It's something what is discussed in all member states. How to balance the personal protection and also the some kind of, let's say, normal life between the people. And it's about a good strategy. It's about a good communication. But on the other hand, it's also good to say that we lost already many people just because we were not able to properly communicate what is necessary in the right time. Hopefully, we will be able to do it better this year, this coming probably coming return of the epidemic. So it's about a good communication, and I believe that we can do it a lot of things together. With ECDC, with our colleagues around Europe. Because the only chance, how to succeed it is to have at least a similar way, how we approaching the pandemic in all countries in Europe. Because in one country, if you can, if you do some regulation and you put the condition that the people needs to wear the masks, in certain environment, and then in other states it's not applied. Then it's raising a lot of doubts, if it is necessary, not necessary, and so on. So I believe that only the coordinated communication and also the coordinated strategy, how we do this protection measures, is the chance to succeed, in the year 2022. What I would like to also mention is a bit, from the area of medical intervention. Again, it's good to have all the treatments available, and it's good to mention it, the monoclonal antibodies and antiviral treatment. But we need to build again the good communication between the medical professionals and the patients, that these treatments are available, but they also serve as the protection, especially for certain patients. So you see that the communication is probably the most crucial tool, to win this long war.
Yeah, absolutely. Jakub, I imagine you're in contact with your epidemiologists and with the ECDC. What are they telling you about the autumn period?
Everybody tells you a bit different story. That's the most complicated issue. I mean, it's a tough time for every minister, for every responsible person. Doesn't matter which member state it is. The problem is that we getting so many different views and so many different recommendations from the scientific area, and it's difficult to make a decision. And this is probably one of the reasons why it is so time consuming, so difficult, and not always at the right time.
So a big question mark.
Sorry to interrupt you. It's very, very important what you mentioned it. I believe, and it was also discussed, during the last EBSCO meeting, the role of ECDC, in coordination of the response, especially, the coordination of those scientific recommendations. We need a body which will help us to have at least similar recommendations in all countries around.
Yes, absolutely. And the recent ECDC legislation expanding its mandate hopefully will give it some more power to do exactly that. But I wanted to go over to Stelios next. I mean, the European Parliament's powers are limited when it comes to proposing new legislation, but it's certainly very effective in putting the spotlight on issues and turning up the pressure both on the Commission and on the member states themselves. So I wanted to know, as a member of the COVID committee, how are you planning on moving this item up on the agenda and turning up the pressure on both the Commission and the Council?
Marco, before answering to your question, I would like to say that it's also our responsibility of protecting the others. It's needs to have to both from clinicians, because as you may know, I'm also a psychiatrist, so I need to respect my patients when they have an issue, when they have a problem, a health disease issue. We need, as clinicians, to protect them and to take the measures that I need in order to be safe. On the other hand, for people who are in immunocompromised situation, they need to deliver to their society, to their people, that they have to protect them and they have to take the measures with mask or the distance in order for everyone to be safe. From the point, for the question, for your question now, I think that the mandate of this committee has a broad issues to deliver. So we will discuss not only the health issues that COVID-19 brought with it, but also we will discuss the issues of human rights, the issues of pharmaceuticals. What can we do and how can we have the appropriate drugs and medicines that we need in time that we need, not only in a EU, in member states level, but also on the European level. We discussed before for joint procurement. So I think that we have a lot of issues to discuss. The mandate of this committee, and I think that the result will be very important, not only for the COVID-19 and the lessons that we have learned, but also for the future crisis, for the future health crisis. How can we all together collaborate in order to avoid a crisis like that we have lived before? Yes, you are right. We have the opportunity to push forward Commission and also Council in order to change how the European Union acts and reacts in crisis, and not only health crisis, but also in crisis in general.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think one thing that we've certainly learned throughout the pandemic so far is this idea of disparate impact, right? That we're all in this together, but maybe some of us are more in it than others at the same time. And that one of the roles of government and public health authorities is to try and balance out this disparate impact and shield the most vulnerable. So hopefully we'll see from the COVID committee some real data, some real actionable information and policy recommendations so that governments can better protect all of their citizens going forward. And on this question of data, I had a question from the audience.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah,
Can I
Gemma,
just come in on that point? Because I think
absolutely.
It's so important. I don't want to lose it. So the first thing to say is I think one of the things I hope we've learned is that in any crisis situation, you put someone in charge of thinking who is the most vulnerable in this situation, and that they have lead responsibility for thinking about that group all the way through. Like the fracturing of responsibility across different bits of the system is a lot of the pain that we are now facing for patients. So I think that that's really important. And then when we're thinking about inequality and inequity, we really have to think about the different dynamics that are at play. So we can see in the UK, vaccines have a protective role. It's not as good for the whole population, but it does have a protective role for people with compromised immunity. And if you're white British, you are 6 times more likely to have had all your vaccines than you are if you're from Pakistani or Bangladeshi or Black African or Black Caribbean heritage. And that means you are less protected, and that means you are more likely to die. That's in the immunocompromised population. And those groups were having their first 2 vaccines, and they haven't had the later ones. And the reason for that is something that we've touched on several times: poor and confused communication. People do not know if they should or they shouldn't get their vaccine. So I think it's really important, as we're thinking about vaccines, as we're thinking about prophylactic treatments, as we're thinking about access to COVID treatments, as we're thinking about the non-pharmaceutical measures, which are the 4 things we need to be thinking about. In all of those, there is an inequity stream that runs through them. That means that people, the most vulnerable, who are made even more vulnerable through the lack of protection from COVID, are faring the worst. And the data on that is impossible to get. It is so hard. And if you can't measure it and you can't really see it, then you can't do anything about it. So I would just really urge that that data is collected and understood so that we can act.
That's a really good point. Thank you, Gemma. I mean, I thought what you said also about responsibilities and silos, so much of this isn't just science or pharmaceutical research, which is of course crucial and very important, but so much of it is organizational, making sure that the bureaucracies are functioning effectively and communicating with one another, and that there is someone you can point to and say, okay, he's the person or she's the person we should be talking about and who's responsible. But you mentioned data just now, and I wanted to ask Lior this. This is a question from the audience, and the question is from David W., who asks, is there data regarding mortality rates of immunocompromised patients by country, age, type of condition to aid risk evaluation? So data we can feed into those policy-making processes to better tailor our interventions. I mean, not to preempt your answer, but I have seen some data that looks like that. So some of it's out there, Lior, but go ahead.
So first of all, yes, there is data out there, definitely. Some of the countries that have more centralized healthcare systems and more robust electronic medical records have access to this data. Israel is one of these countries, and we have access, especially at the Clalit Health Services where I work. We cover about 60 to 70% of the population, and we have data on them and their risk factors, and it's something that we monitor and plug into the risk factors for calculations. But I also wanted to address one of the things that was brought up earlier, and touch on that, is that mask wearing is important, especially in the clinical settings, and also, in my opinion, in public transportation. And it needs to be in one voice and heard and understood, and communication is definitely important there. But not only just to protect the immune-compromised population, but also from further variants that are coming in, developing, running around, and using masks and other non-pharmaceutical interventions in very public areas such as public transportation. If it should be mandated across the board, it will help to reduce and mitigate and control these events when they will happen. COVID is definitely not behind us. And just one last thing other to address that Gemma added, and I wanted to expand on that, is that there's further disparities, and this population is suffering not only from the isolation, from the fact that they don't see other people, but they actually have more serious health issues. They don't have their routine checkups. They don't have their blood works done. They don't have exercise as much as they should. Mental health issues because of the isolation. All of these are causing much more severe issues, medical issues that we'll be needing to face down the road. There's a price that we need to pay. And that's why NPIs still need to be there. You can't just put it all behind you and go back to life being normal with the best medications that there are.
That's great. I did now want to touch on the issue of treatments, and I understand there are national disparities when it comes to access to these. So here's a question from the audience. This is still for you, Lior. Does Israel hold data on the effectiveness of monoclonal antibodies, and can this be made available to the UK government? So I guess, Lior, you can't decide whether it can be made available, but you can maybe tell us if they have that data. That question's from Martin Atkinson, by the way.
So actually, there was data already published and published in the medical literature from studies that have been done that show that monoclonal antibodies reduce hospitalizations, reduce morbidity, and reduce mortality. Our local data in Israel from the last wave it's a bit early right now to have coherent data. You need to have enough time from the providing of the medication to the wave that started to appear, and you need 2-3 weeks down the road. So I assume we will have data published in about a month or so, I believe, maybe a bit earlier. But it's just a little early right now to provide. But we can extrapolate from other data that is already out there that they are doing what they're supposed to be doing, and it's the best thing that we have to offer right now at this moment.
Well, Martin, I guess keep your eyes peeled if in the next 30 days or so you might get that data. David McIntosh from UKPA asks, and sorry to keep picking on you, Lior, but these are scientific questions, and then I will get to the rest of the panelists. But what's the role of immunoglobulins? Do they have a role to play in addition to the new monoclonals?
So first of all, monoclonal antibodies are a type of immunoglobulins. I mean, it's the same thing, only shelf-made, made in a factory and not produced from people.
Sorry, just to specify, they're asking about human-derived immunoglobulins.
Okay, so the human-derived, there are some studies out there, but there are some challenges with that. And you have to understand that the challenges is, first of all, collecting them from the people. And you need to collect them far enough into the current variant wave that the immunoglobulins that are there are protective against the current variant. So if I provide human immunoglobulins from 3 months ago or 6 months ago, they won't provide the same protection that they will if I collect from somebody who's been exposed. So there's always a delay in that. Also, not everyone produces the same amount of immunoglobulins in their blood as everyone else, and we want to have a high dose. So it's difficult to identify, and it takes more effort and time to identify the people who are donors that can provide these high dose of immunoglobulins. And always when you give someone human sourced immunoglobulins, it's like it's transferring blood products. There's always risks that come up with that. So it has a role, it's there, it's possible, but it's more challenging. And it's challenging because the variants keep on changing on us. And even the monoclonal antibodies, certain medications that have been available 6 months ago are not effective now. And it's something that needs to be kept on updated and adjusted to the current variants of concern that are flooding us now and causing the current illness. I mean, even people who receive the monoclonal antibodies or immunoglobulins now, 3 months or 4 months down the road, if a different variant of concern will appear, then we'll need something different because it may not be as effective as it should be.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Lior. Jakob, Lior just said, that these monoclonal antibodies, keeping in mind that, yes, we need to change them and that the variants are changing, but that data from Israel suggests that they're effective. Do you think we'll see more joint procurement on this issue of the monoclonal antibodies? I know that it's been a mixed bag with the joint procurement. There's certainly been some successes, but there are difficulties. And as a reminder, joint procurement, it's the Commission writes a kind of contract, and then the 27 different member countries can join in. And it's difficult because you're trying to balance the interests and needs of 27 different countries. So, Jakob, do you see an opportunity here for joint procurement, or is this a case where it's better left to the member states individually?
I think it depends on the quantity of that kind of treatment which is produced, by the companies. If you have the production, which is making, the amount, which is then easy to put it through the classical setup of price and reimbursement, then it's I would say more complicating the situation than helping with. On the other hand, when we see that the situation where we have the urgent need, the number of people which are waiting for the treatment, then of course this is the way how to ensure that the European market will get the certain amount, for the patients as soon as possible, which is, I believe, very positive thing.
But there's a bit of an irony here, I have to point out, because surely the best time or when you want to do joint procurement is before the emergency. But understand, for political considerations, that can be complicated. But sorry for interrupting you. Go ahead.
No. It's you are absolutely right. On the other hand, you have to also take in consideration then that it's quite complicated then for the regulatory bodies, in national states, how to include, those therapies, which are procured on this level to the system. It's always then quite complicated, to get the data about the efficiency of the treatment, which is also again very important for us to understand, that we reimburse, the treatment which really serve the purpose and helping the people. And what we saw, during the last year, that the funding, for this kind of procurement is quite a complication for a number of states. So it's possible to use it, but then currently we are not at the stage, that we can do it in wide scale. So what I believe is, that we should really have this joint negotiation and procurement, for really the emergency issue. But in the normal time, it's necessary, that the marketing authorization holders really follow, the systematic screening, and also gives the chance to the national states to reimburse them, from the healthcare budgets. Because we can see that when we pay, from the budget which is dedicated, let's say, or let's say from the money which comes from, for example, in Czech Republic, from Ministry of Finance, it's very complicated for us then to return the investment back to the Ministry of Finance from the reimbursement money which comes from the payer funds. So, I mean, it's efficient, but it also creates a lot of hurdles in national reimbursement schemes. So, on one side, we need to adapt, on this new model. Or second, we have to think, how to create fast pathway of the needs of those new therapies, to the national reimbursement systems.
Thank you for that, Jakub. Yes, it's certainly never easy when you have to go through the regulatory pipeline in Europe, but I know there's work being done in the Commission to update the legislation, but that's a story for another time. We are reaching the end of the discussion. We have a few more minutes, but before we go, I did want to touch again on this issue of mental health, because as paradoxical as it may seem, this is the place of some of the most acute suffering, that fear, that anxiety, the depression of being isolated. Lior, I know that this is an area where you have a background. What is the role of the EU? What is the role of national public health authorities when it comes to mental health? And how would you like to see treatment evolve?
I think that there is
sorry, that was for Stelios, not Lior.
Yeah, okay.
I'm getting my names confused here. Sorry about that, Stelios.
Yes, I think the only step to solve this issue, in my opinion, is that we need to have a mental health strategy on a European level, and we need to raise the awareness of people that if they face problems like you have mentioned already, Marco, they need to be in touch with a clinician, with somebody who can provide services in order to be protected, in order to treat his or her mental health issues. I think that we need to work stronger on this direction, and we have to be more in cooperation among member states in order to create strategies not only on European level but also on a national level. My Prime Minister, during the pandemic, has created the Ministry of Mental Health because he recognized that how much important is the issue of mental health during pandemic, not only for the general population, but also, and Lior is going to agree with me, but also for the health professionals, because as you can imagine, during the pandemic, they had a lot of pressure on them, and they also need something and some strategic in order to avoid all this kind of pressure. So I think with the upcoming European Union of Health that has Ms. President Ursula von der Leyen has announced, we need to see the direction of having a mental health strategy in common. And I think that with vaccines and all these measures that we have taken to save the lives and strengthening our health systems, we need to show to the direction that we need also a very strong and a very concrete mental health services to all citizens.
I think that would be one great takeaway from the pandemic would be developing a mental health strategy for Europe. And it's also very interesting to hear the Greek example of a ministry for mental health specifically. We've reached the end of our discussion today. I want to thank all of our panelists for tackling such an important topic. I think that we really covered a broad range of points. We discussed non-pharmaceutical interventions and how to balance that with the desires of the public. We've discussed treatments, the next generation treatments, what the science is showing and the difficulties with procurement. And we also discussed that really important point on mental health, which is such a factor on the needs of immunocompromised patients post-COVID-19. So a big thank you to Jakob, Stelios, Lior, and Gemma for joining us today. We do have a poll, so I will be reading the results of the poll. As a reminder, it was how safely or unsafely do you think people who are immunocompromised will be able to return to normal in the same way as the rest of the population? And I don't think it's a surprise to hear that very unsafely won by 39%, and the next one down is fairly unsafely. So altogether, we're at well over 70% of respondents thinking that basically, it's a difficult situation for immunocompromised patients, and that we should be doing their best to meet their needs. I also want to thank everyone watching online for joining us in our discussion. A big thank you to our sponsor, AstraZeneca, who made this event possible. I'd like to ask the audience to send in their feedback at live@politico.eu. Check our website for event updates. We have a great lineup, and we'll also be having our healthcare summit in October, and I will be present for that. That's www.politico.eu/events. Thank you so much for joining me today.
This is an age of disruption, of profound revolutionary change.
What we're really asking ministers is to empower the ambassadors.
The only thing that you really push forth is the truth.
You don't see many women represented when it comes to the decisions as to how to handle the pandemic.